I didn't see any concern on his part. Who's to say as to what would set him off to discard somebody else or off somebody else?
Have you ever wondered what goes through a killer's mind on the last day of their life? Do they beg for mercy? Do they relive their worst decision? Or pray for someone to remember who they were before it all went wrong? On May 28, 2002, Napoleon Beazley opened his eyes to the final sunrise of his life. He was 25 years old, educated, articulate, once a star athlete. However, 8 years earlier, at just 17, he shot and killed a man in cold blood. But in those final 24 hours behind the prison walls, he wrote his final words, faced his past, and met death head on. What really happened in those last moments? And why do so many believe this execution should never have happened at all? This is the final countdown of Napoleon Beazley, a teenager when he killed, a man when the state killed him. Before the headlines, before the courtroom, before the execution chamber, there was just a boy. Napoleon Beazley was born on August 5th, 1976, in Tyler, Texas. He was the middle child in a close-knit black family. His father was a pastor. His mother worked for the school district. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable, proud, rooted in faith and discipline. Napoleon wasn't a troublemaker, not at first. He was bright, outgoing, a gifted athlete. In high school, he ran track, played football, and served as class president. His teachers described him as respectful, intelligent, and full of potential. He had big dreams, college, business, maybe even politics one day. But underneath the smiles and speeches, something was shifting. In his senior year, Napoleon began spending more time with the wrong crowd. Fast money, fast cars, fast choices. That spring, something in him cracked. He started skipping class, ignoring curfew, chasing the thrill of danger. By the spring of 1994, Napoleon Beazley had just turned 17. On the surface, he was a young man with promise, but the boy who once stood at pep rallies with a microphone was about to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. On the night of April 19th in Tyler, Texas, Napoleon made a choice that would alter countless lives forever. He wasn't alone. With him were two friends, Cedric and Donald Coleman. The three of them drove through a quiet neighborhood in search of a car. Not just any car, a new black Mercedes-Benz. Something expensive, something powerful. They spotted one pulling into a driveway. The driver was 63-year-old John Luddig, a respected businessman and father. He had just returned home with his wife. The garage door began to close behind them. That's when Napoleon approached. What happened next was sudden and irreversible. Two gunshots rang out in the stillness. Both hit Mr. Luddig in the head. He collapsed in his garage, only feet away from his wife. In the chaos, she became the next target. A shot was fired in her direction, but it missed. She fell to the ground, feigning death, and in doing so, survived. The three teenagers fled. Hours later, police recovered the stolen vehicle. It didn't take long for Cedric and Donald Coleman to be arrested. Faced with decades behind bars, both would testify against Napoleon. But there was something else that hadn't yet come to light. The man Napoleon had killed was not just a businessman. He was the father of U.S. federal judge J. Michael Luddig. His crime sent shockwaves through the Texas community, and what followed over the next 8 years would raise deeper questions about justice, age, and whether redemption could ever outweigh a single, irrevocable act. He was just 17 when he pulled the trigger, legally a juvenile, but prosecutors charged him as an adult. A jury in Smith County, Texas, didn't hesitate. After a swift 3-day trial, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of capital murder. The sentence: death. Beazley's defense team fought back. not just on legal grounds but on moral ones. They pointed to his age, his clean record before the shooting, his academic excellence, his community service, his remorse. They submitted psychiatric evaluations showing he had the potential for rehabilitation, but none of it swayed the courts. Over the years, his case traveled through every level of the judicial system, from Texas trial courts to the U.S. Supreme Court. He filed habeas petitions. He appealed rulings. He asked for reconsideration. He begged for clemency. Each attempt was met with silence or rejection. His case reached the Supreme Court 4 separate times. Each time, his appeal was denied, but the case wasn't simple. Judge J. Michael Luttig had deep ties to 3 sitting justices. When the case landed before the highest court, Justices Scalia, Souter, and Thomas all recused themselves. Only 6 justices remained. When the court finally voted on Beazley's stay of execution, it split 3-3, and with that tie, his final hope was gone. In August of 2001, just 2 days before his first scheduled execution, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted a temporary stay. But it didn't last. The stay was lifted the following spring. By May of 2002, time had run out. His lawyers filed for clemency. Over 300 letters poured in from around the world. People asked Texas to spare his life, not to excuse his crime, but to recognize how young he was when he committed it. Even the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles recommended mercy, but Governor Rick Perry said no. The execution would proceed as scheduled. Beazley had spent nearly 8 years on death row, watching time pass through the narrow slit of his cell window. He had come within hours of execution, before then watched it lifted without explanation, but this time felt different. As the date neared, it became clear that his final moments were not some hypothetical possibilities. They were real, and they were coming fast. Beazley had turned 25 just 9 months earlier. He had spent nearly a third of his life waiting to die for a crime he committed as a teenager. Now his final hours had begun. It was 6 o'clock on a warm Tuesday morning when the final day of Napoleon Beazley's life began. Inside the death house of the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas, the lights never turned off. There were no windows, no sunlight, no way to measure the passing of time except by the ticking of a slow, deliberate clock and the precise schedule of a place built for death. Napoleon Beazley sat in a cell just 15 feet away from the execution chamber. The walls were sterile. The air hung heavy with silence. His bunk was tightly made. His clothes were folded neatly. He had showered the night before. At that hour, he sat alone, shoulders hunched, head low, over a sheet of lined loose-leaf paper, a cheap pen in hand. He was writing what would be his final message to the world. It would be read after he was gone. He would not speak from the gurney. He'd made that choice days earlier. To him, speaking final words at the moment of death would come across as just another performance, a desperate act for pity. He believed that contrition from the gurney was seen only as an 11th-hour jailhouse conversion. He didn't want his words to be dismissed as manipulation. So instead, he wrote in silence, slowly, carefully, knowing these were the last words anyone would ever hear from him. He was offered breakfast around 7, powdered eggs, toast, and coffee. The tray slid through the slot in the steel door. He barely touched it, not out of defiance, but because his stomach was tight. His appetite had disappeared sometime during the night, maybe even the week before. He had stopped asking what time it was. He didn't need to anymore, his body knew. By 8 o'clock, a spiritual advisor was brought in to see him. They had spoken many times over the years, but this morning their words moved differently, slower, deeper. They talked about life, about redemption, about what might wait on the other side, and about the version of Napoleon that once was, and the man he had become. They prayed together, hands resting against the thick glass, separated by a steel wall and 10 years of consequences. The question lingered in the silence between them. How do you prepare someone to die? At around 11, Napoleon was served his final meal, a seafood platter, fried shrimp, catfish, hush puppies, and an orange soda. He ate alone, slowly, without finishing, but he thanked the guard who brought it. Then he sat back down in his cell. No more motions, no more delays, just time, moving forward, and a right foot that wouldn't stop twitching. Outside, the day was heating up. Protests were growing louder. Some people had gathered in support of Napoleon, holding signs, begging for mercy, for reconsideration, for justice. Others had come to see justice carried out. For the family of John Luddig, a beloved father and husband, whose life had been taken by a teenage boy in a garage in Tyler, Texas. Inside the death house, time passed differently. The hallway was silent. Beazley sat back down on his bunk. His statement was finished now, folded in half, and waiting. His hands rested in his lap, his eyes fixed ahead. But his thoughts were far away, on the people he loved, the mistakes he had made, the man he had become, and the life that was slipping away by the hour. Each breath was deliberate, each moment fragile. By midday, the atmosphere inside the death house had changed. The silence was heavier now, less like routine, more like countdown. Now, in the stillness of the afternoon, he prepared himself for the final stretch alone. Guards walked past quietly, their footsteps echoing off the concrete. Days earlier, he had said goodbye to his family, not because he didn't love them, but because he loved them too much to let them see him like this, vulnerable, raw. He didn't want to break down, and he didn't want them to carry that final image with them forever. Still, the weight of that choice was with him this morning. He had grown up being told that strong men don't cry. But now, with hours to live, he felt the tears pressing at the edge of his control. He didn't let them fall, but they were there. To the guards and prison staff, he appeared calm, focused, almost unnervingly composed. But if you looked closely, one thing betrayed him: his right foot. It wouldn't stop twitching. Outside, the world hadn't stopped. A light rain had begun to fall over Huntsville. The pavement darkened under gray clouds, and droplets clung to the razor wire above the walls unit. A graying woman named Gloria Rubach stood at the front, her voice cutting through the damp air. "In half an hour, the state of Texas will commit murder," she shouted into a microphone. "The murder is premeditated. The weapon of choice is poison." A few officers stiffened, but no one replied. The Supreme Court had already ruled. 6-0. Napoleon's final appeal had been denied. Governor Rick Perry had declined to intervene, despite the State Pardon Board's recommendation for clemency. The gurney would be prepared soon, and in the rain just outside, soaked signs trembled in wind. As the clock edged closer to 6 o'clock in the evening, the somber atmosphere inside the Walls Unit's death house was palpable. Napoleon Beazley was led quietly from his holding cell. His gait was steady but subdued, a young man shaped by years of waiting and the weight of an irreversible sentence. His eyes, calm but shadowed with the gravity of what was to come, met those of the officers escorting him, acknowledging their presence without a word. The walk to the execution chamber was a slow procession through dimly lit halls, a final passage that few experience, marked by an eerie silence and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Those present were keenly aware of the magnitude of this moment. For Beazley, this was the culmination of years behind bars, appeals denied, and the harsh reality of a life cut short. Upon entering the chamber, the sterile environment was stark and unyielding. The gurney stood center stage, cold metal gleaming under harsh overhead lights. The room was filled with witnesses, prison officials, clergy, media representatives, and relatives, each carrying their own heavy emotions. Beazley was carefully placed onto the gurney. The leather straps were methodically fastened around his wrists, ankles, and torso, securing him for the final act. Despite the restraints, there was a sense of solemn dignity in his composure. When asked if he wished to make a final statement, Beazley turned his gaze toward the family of the victim, particularly John Luddig's daughter, who sat quietly among the witnesses. His voice, steady and measured, carried a weight of sorrow and resignation as he said simply, "No." In those final moments, time seemed to stretch. The intravenous lines were prepared, the lethal cocktail ready to flow. The air was thick with a mixture of tension, grief, and an unbearable stillness that only such moments can bring. As the drugs began to enter his system, Beazley's body reacted instinctively. His breaths came unevenly, sputtering and gasping, a visible struggle as consciousness slowly faded. The flicker of life dimmed as the chemicals took hold, his chest rising and falling with decreasing effort. Witnesses watched silently, many visibly moved, as the young man who had once been so full of life now surrendered to the inevitability of death. Within minutes, the labored breathing ceased entirely. At precisely 6:17 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the attending prison doctor pronounced Napoleon Beazley dead. It was Texas's 14th execution that year, but for those in that room, it was a moment that transcended statistics, a profound and somber chapter closing on one life, leaving ripples across many others. Later, Beazley's written final statement was made public. The words revealed a complex blend of remorse and critique. He wrote, "The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless. But the person that committed that act is no longer here. I am. I'm not going to struggle physically against any restraints. I'm not going to shout, use profanity, or make idle threats. Understand, though, that I'm not only upset, but I'm saddened by what is happening here tonight. I'm not only saddened, but disappointed that a system that is supposed to protect and uphold what is just and right can be so much like me when I made the same shameful mistake. If someone tried to dispose of everyone here for participating in this killing, I'd scream a resounding no. I'd tell them to give them all the gift that they would not give me, and that's to give them all a second chance. I'm sorry that I am here. I'm sorry that you're all here. I'm sorry that John Luddig died, and I'm sorry that it was something in me that caused all of this to happen to begin with. Tonight we tell the world that there are no second chances in the eyes of justice. Tonight we tell our children that in some instances, in some cases, killing is right. This conflict hurts us all. There are no sides. The people who support this proceeding think this is justice. The people that think that I should live think that is justice. As difficult as it may seem, this is a clash of ideals, with both parties committed to what they feel is right. But who's wrong if in the end we're all victims? In my heart, I have to believe that there is a peaceful compromise to our ideals. I don't mind if there are none for me, as long as there are for those who are yet to come. There are a lot of men like me on death row, good men who fell to the same misguided emotions but may not have recovered as I have. Give those men a chance to do what's right. Give them a chance to undo their wrongs. A lot of them want to fix the mess they started but don't know how. The problem is not in that people aren't willing to help them find out, but in the system telling them it won't matter anyway. No one wins tonight. No one gets closure. No one walks away victorious. This statement echoed far beyond the prison walls, especially regarding juvenile offenders like Beazley, who was just months shy of his 18th birthday when the crime occurred. Napoleon Beazley's execution also sparked intense debate across the nation and around the world. As one of the last juvenile offenders executed in the United States, His case became a focal point in discussions about the death penalty, youth justice, and the possibility of redemption. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, publicly condemned the execution, emphasizing Beazley's age at the time of the crime and arguing that young offenders deserve the chance for rehabilitation rather than irreversible punishment. Beazley's case, along with others, influenced growing legal scrutiny over juvenile capital punishment. In 2005, just 3 years after his death, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that executing offenders for crimes committed under the age of 18 violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. This landmark decision effectively ended the practice of executing juvenile offenders nationwide. For many, Napoleon Beazley's story serves as a solemn reminder of the complexities surrounding justice and mercy, how youthful mistakes, compounded by harsh sentencing, can lead to tragic ends. What do you think about the death penalty for juvenile offenders? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this video thought-provoking, please like and share it to help spread awareness. Don't forget to subscribe for more detailed stories like this one. Until next time, take care and stay curious.